Today's seminar is on how heavy should you go when you're lifting. So it's a complex topic. We're trying to essentially describe something that's very, very subjective. It's very much like telling somebody how they should perceive a particular color or how a food should taste. It's up to the individual. So what we're going to go over are some parameters that you want to look for, things to consider when calculating your weights, and some more things to make it a bit more clear. So the disclaimer is this is a general piece of education. The advice is individualized. It may be appropriate for some. It may be less than appropriate for others. So quite a bit of this takes time to find what works for you. So we wanted to announce that first. The goals for today, first we want to define what stress is, how that is perceived by the body, because that's really going to be the biggest determinant of what you do in the gym, and how it is that you'll make progress over time, and essentially the metrics within your workout of what a particular movement feels like, the idea of productive discomfort instead of something being painful, and some basic metrics of strength, things that you want to work towards, and finding your tell, which is essentially a way to estimate your readiness for the day. So it's something that you're somewhat familiar with Train Heroic, where you get those 3 questions before you start every single workout. We are going to give you a few different tools beyond that 3-part questionnaire. And one of the gauges that we'll give you in terms of determining whether you've got the right weight for you is something called reps in reserve. So we'll dive into all that into quite a bit more detail as we go on. So first we want to go over what stress is. Essentially, stress is a signal. And our body is constantly adapting. It's looking for the path of least resistance. So the things that we adapt to are things that we do either very frequently or very intensely. So if you've ever been on a road trip and you've spent 8 hours straight in the car and then you get out, you feel super stiff. You've gotten really adaptive towards that seated position in the car, and anything else just feels a lot more difficult. So that would be an example of something that would be very frequent. Something that is intense is what you do in here. If you're getting stronger, you're doing something very intensely with your barbell or dumbbell, and your body sees an adaptation, ideally, as a result. So we are constantly adapting. Our body's constantly looking for the path of least resistance. It wants to find efficiency, and it wants to make things easier. So you'll find that the first time you might have barbell deadlifted, it was tricky. You weren't necessarily sure how you should place your hands, where your feet should go, and it was a whole lot of effort to move what might now be a relatively insignificant amount of weight. So you get adaptive towards the things that you do. So next, Zach will talk about the difference between good stress and bad stress.
From a biology perspective, I know I said the biology word, everyone's eyes are like glazing over. We're not going to go too much into that today, I promise. But from a stress standpoint, if you think about work and you've got someone pissing you off, my hair is really upsetting you today, right? All those things are bad stressors. Your body really responds. If you don't like my presenting style, if you haven't, yeah. I joke around a lot. I keep it kind of casual, so I apologize. But your body responds with certain chemicals, certain hormones to those bad stressors. Sometimes exercise can be seen as that bad stressor. That said, if you think about, we've all heard of the runner's high, right? Every time you go for a run, or like those endurance athletes, when they go for a really long run, they get that really good feeling. That's just a kind of a different set of chemicals that are being released in the brain that give you kind of that good feeling. Does that make sense? And so your body, based on the stress you're giving your body, will respond kind of in different ways, and based on how it responds, it'll start to learn to adapt, as Devin kind of said. Make sense? So that's pretty much kind of the difference between the two. And so kind of as we move along here, the reason your body adapts, what we have homeostasis versus allostasis. Again, homeostasis, big biology word, basically means like set, fixed point where things work, right? In your body temperature tends to be right around 98 degrees Fahrenheit. Homeostasis. Allostasis is kind of the working range where you can survive, right? If you get up to 103, we consider that a fever, but you're not dead yet. Make sense? Yet being the key word. So that's kind of how it works. Karen's like, ooh, hot take. But that's kind of how it works. And so your body is going to adapt to different stressors to make survival a little bit easier for you, right? The more times you pick up 100 pounds, hopefully as you go, the easier that should be. Does that make sense? So that's pretty much how that works. And so as we kind of look at that, I'll give you the example of parasympathetic versus sympathetic. When we talk about the bad stressors, right? The lion jumping out of the woods, your fight or flight, it's go time, it's survival mode, that's your sympathetic nervous system. When you get to go home, sit in your bathtub, light the candles, rose petals, right after dinner, that's your parasympathetic, that's your rest and recovery. So the stress upregulates the sympathetic, your body's super active, metabolic processes increase. The parasympathetic is your rest, relax, that's your recovery mode. And your body's constantly trying to work and balance out the two. Does that make sense?
So a good example of this would be your thermostat. So if you have your thermostat set for 65 degrees, say it is 75 degrees outside, you open up all your windows, your air conditioner is going to kick in to do whatever it can to get you back to that particular point. So think of homeostasis as that set point, but with our body, there's a bit of a range. That's where the difference between homeostasis, that set point, and then that range of allostasis, that's the biggest difference between the two. So if you want to make progress, it's more about shifting your set point gradually over time. So stress the system, allow for enough recovery, and then ideally you have created a positive adaptation towards the stressor that you're looking to adapt to. Let's go to the next one. So a perfect example of this, to make it less complex, think of your stress and your capacity for stress as a glass of water. The size of the glass is your capacity to handle stress. The amount of liquid that's in there is what you can give. So if you've got a full glass of water, that would be you at your most recovered. If it's completely empty, that would be when you're answering 1 out of 5 on every single one of those Train Heroic questions. So our body doesn't necessarily differentiate well between good stress and bad stress. If you've had a challenging day and then you have a really heavy workout on top of that, pour out some water for both those things. If you have a bath with rose petals, you light some candles, fill that glass up. There's many ways. We all have ways that we recharge to essentially refill our glass, but to get an idea of like what state of readiness you may have, that glass is a perfect example. Some days you've got more, some days you've got less, and knowing how to measure what's in your cup is pivotal for knowing what to put into your workout, what weights to choose, and how difficult this all should be when you're training. So training is essentially, you create these positive adaptations through progressive overload. So my favorite example to really give a good metaphor for progressive overload is the story of Milo and the bull. If you've taken one of my classes, I've probably talked about this at some point. It's just a very simple representation. So the story is Milo is a Greek wrestler, and he has a baby calf. And as a part of his training to be an Olympian, he will pick up this calf and he'll carry it as far as he possibly can. And the story is that he picked up this calf until eventually it was a full-grown bull. And when it came time for him to participate in the Olympics, he's carrying this full-grown bull into the stadium, intimidates all his opponents, and ends up winning the gold medal. So in this example, when he's training, he's either picking up a heavier bull or he's carrying it a little bit further. So progressive overload is just as simple as you've either lifted more weights, maybe you've done more sets and reps. Over time, the amount of work that you've done has gone up. That could be within a particular workout. That could be in a week. It could be in a month. It just depends on the scale that you want to measure. So we can use Train Heroic to really showcase how you've progressed. And this is where Zac excels.
All right, y'all. It's your favorite time. Take out your phones. You got to stare at your screen. You're welcome. This is where I lose everyone. Don't look at that cat video. Yeah. If you want to open up Train Heroic for me, we'll chat about how we can kind of track your progress over time. Once you go into the app, you should see little bar on the bottom that's got a bunch of different stuff. You should see calendar, my training, that's like got some barbells, settings, or like your initials are down there. If you go onto that second button from the left, it should say my training or something along those lines. If that's not the exact word, please forgive me, but you should see a little barbell down there. Does everyone see what I'm talking about? Anyone lost so far?
I don't think I have it.
Uh-oh.
I think I deleted it.
Oh, she doesn't have the app. See, this is the person. I knew there was going to be one.
We used to, you know, when you switch to that other app, to
Wellness Living?
reserve,
Uh-huh.
I just deleted it.
Oh, she's got rid of them all. So while Karen downloads the app again, the rest of you, if you kind of go into that My Training tab, Karen, you can go back and rewatch this just to kind of help. History, yep, might be that. If you go into history, you should automatically get a list of stuff you've recently done. If you were in class on Monday, bench press is probably one of the top movements on your list. There is also a search bar in there for you as well. If you go in and click on one of those movements, what you should see is a nice chart there for you. It's a nice line graph because who doesn't love graphics? That graph is going to trend some direction. It's either going to trend slightly up if you start to connect, hopefully up, right? If you start to connect the peaks. If you're recovering from an injury, maybe that graph trended down a little bit. If it was like your first time or like this was your second time trying out the bench press, your graph might be not trending at all or kind of just in a nice plateau, and that's totally okay. But when we start talking about that progressive overload, when we take a step back and look at your estimated 1 rep max, which is what this graph is estimating, we want to see a trending line going up and to the right. Does that make sense? That means your estimated 1 rep max is going up. Now, as you go, right, as rep schemes change, you might be trying to figure out what weight you're trying to use. That's why you're all here, hopefully. If you're not, the yoga class is next door. As you're trying to figure all that out, you might see little dips, right? As we change rep schemes, we're going a little bit more volume this month, and that's all totally fine. Again, it's all about how it's looking across time. Does that make sense? And so this can be a great, extremely simple way to kind of just give you a visual representation of how you're progressing. With this, what's cool is if you scroll down a little bit, you should see some previous sets, reps, and weights that you've inputted, if you've inputted. Again, not to call out Karen, but you know, she's still, you know, trying to figure it out. So, yes, Cassie, go ahead. Yeah.
I have a lot of trouble like having it save what I put in.
Mm-hmm.
So is it true that you have to check every single little green check mark?
It is. And on top of that,
Okay.
you have to hit finish session at the end as well. Yeah, so it is a little bit finicky in that sense, but after you check all those green check marks, fun fact, you'll see like a double check on top of your sets. If you hit that, it'll automatically check all of the sets and the reps that you've done. You have to go through, scroll to the right, scroll to the right, scroll to the right, hit finish session. Once you do that, it should save everything for you, and then you should see that history in that history tab. Does that make sense? So this is kind of a nice, useful way if you use it or use it properly for you to kind of just see how you're progressing along. And if for whatever reason you're at a plateau, then we can start to kind of dissect the whys. Does that make sense? Do we want to kind of walk through how to track a workout as just like a mock workout? Do we all kind of have a sense of what that looks like? Yeah, Gina's like, just push the button. Yeah, just check the green box. Right, if you're not seeing a green circle next to all your sets and reps, we got to get one of those to show up somehow. Cool?
You actually don't have to check all your set. If you like miss a set, you don't have to check it. You
Sure.
still finish the work.
Yeah, yes, that is a great point. Yes, not that you would ever slack, but if you are in a rush and you don't do a set, you don't need to check that, absolutely. So, the cool thing again about that graph, as we kind of talk about the metrics that we use to measure things, the graph is a metric of your estimated 1 rep max, meaning the maximum amount of weight you could lift one time. What's cool is science says we can like estimate that using different sets and rep schemes from earlier, all that sort of stuff. But that's only one metric. Another metric we might use is just the sheer number of reps at a specific weight, right? If you have a weight goal in mind where you're like, I want to back squat my body weight, first time you do it, you might get 1. After a couple months, you might go back and try it again. You might get 3 or 4 reps. Does that make sense? So that's another great example of how we can measure something. When we start getting into some other fun stuff like power training, speed training, the time at which it takes to do something, or whether or not we're pain-free at a certain weight can also be super, super useful metrics and great feedback tools to tell you how you're progressing along. So sometimes, again, whether we're recovering from injury, whether we just have a movement that tends to just be a pain in the butt, or in your squat, you tend to have, like me, a hip shift to the left. You might train for 3 months just to get rid of that hip shift. And then hopefully that'll set you up for even more success and a little bit more stability in your lift for the next 3 months. Cool? All right. Any last questions on Train Heroic? All right. I have to, unfortunately, ask you to put your phones away now. So sorry. But as we kind of move forward here, what is nice about Train Heroic is as soon as you click start session, you should see a list of questions. If you onboarded with me, I'm like, oh, just skip them. Now here's me regretting that because I'm like, yeah, Gina's shaking her head like, yeah, idiot, I remember. Here's me regretting that because depending on how you're feeling, it can be a nice feedback tool for how ready you are for a stressful workout, right? For working out to give yourself a little bit of stress. So Train Heroic asks you questions like, how'd you sleep? How is your current stress level? How sore are you? Based on all of those, it's gonna give you a readiness score out of 5. The higher your number, the more likely you are to have and be ready for the stress of a workout. If your number is 1, my advice, just go home and take a nap. That usually helps a little bit. So that's one way to measure from kind of a more subjective, how am I feeling? How's my body feeling? Other ways, again, science is pretty cool. They've started to research this like in weird ways. First one, grip strength. Grip strength has been directly correlated to nervous system activation and workout preparedness. So, how fresh are we all feeling? Okay, just like, are you kidding? I'm in like my nice clothes. Like, challenge by choice here. Challenge by choice. If you're interested, what we can do here is start to talk and walk through some of these metrics. Again, you don't have to do any of them. You might choose 1 or 2. But if you're interested and you're like, yeah, screw it, I don't mind getting a little chalk on my hands right now, go ahead, pop up. Let's head on over to the rig. We're going to talk grip strength, and we're just basically going to do an active hang for time. If you're coming off the back of a workout, you might not have the best grip strength right now, and that's totally fine. Again, this is just kind of like to get a sense of how you're feeling. So go ahead, y'all. Come on, stand up. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Come on over. Yeah, reps for time. We'll get there. So again, this is all challenge by choice. If you're interested, grab a little bit of chalk, throw it on your hands, and then find a place you can hang from a bar. Again, if you're fresh, hey, I got good news for you. I'm gonna set the clock for you. We're gonna get it going. Give me a max hang time. You can, if you jot this time down in your phone or something like that, come back to this as kind of a reference point. Again, if you're like, oh, Zach, I was 2 seconds off my max hang time for this workout, what should I do? My advice is gonna be like, yeah, go ahead and go for it, right? 2 seconds out of a minute-long hang might not be so bad. 2 seconds shorter on a 5-second hang. Okay, now we're looking at 40% of that time is gone. Maybe it's a little bit different. Does that make sense? But when y'all are ready, I lied, I don't have the remote, so guess what? Yeah, Devin's got to watch. We are just gonna pop up onto the bar, get those feet off, whichever grip you wanna have, hands over, hands under, go ahead, hang on out. This is when everyone gets hyper competitive all of a sudden. Karen's staring at Cassidy like, yep, I'm a win. Don't worry, y'all. I promise I'm going to be the first one off, so. Yeah. So, keep that time going. Big hang here. Nice and active.
When I see feet drop, I'll tell you your time.
Yeah. What was my time? Yeah, thanks.
Barely anything.
Keep hanging out.
40 seconds. Yeah.
Yes. A fair question. If your readiness scores a 1, I won't late cancel you. I'll just
53.
all out.
We're at a minute.
Nice, Linda. Minute.
I know who's the climber of the bunch.
Still smiling.
That's 75 seconds. We'll cap it at 90. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, time.
90 seconds. All right. Beautiful.
So if you have the capacity to do that for an extended period of time, it could be helpful to maybe switch that to one arm, but ultimately, you're looking for your tell to be consistent. You need a number of different workouts where you've got some consistent data. If every single time you're able to do a minute and then all of a sudden one workout you got 30 seconds, pay attention to that. I don't know about you, but there's a couple workouts where I've just had plates fall out of my hands. Has anybody else had that happen? Okay. That may not be the strongest day. So have a metric and just have a bunch of data with which to compare that to. So grip strength is one. There's stories of old Soviet coaches that would test the readiness of their athletes for the Olympics with a grip device. They'd see how much force they could produce with their hand, and they could see how they were peaking. And if they were peaking too early or too late, that was it's hell for them. Another thing could be how a particular movement feels. I know, for me personally, if I'm performing a push-up and I feel it in my biceps, the shoulders kind of ache, maybe I need more of an extended warm-up that day. Maybe I'm not going as heavy as I would like. Whatever that metric is for you, keep it consistent. Another one would be your toe touch. So if you have a baseline toe touch, it's very easy to reach the floor, maybe palm the floor, and then there's one day where getting to your mid-shin is a challenge. Something might be especially stiff. So that could be a day where you warm up a little bit more slowly, maybe you go a little bit lighter. There's a lot of different tells. The toe touch is just really easy to implement. So whatever that tell is, have that be something that you refer back to on a regular basis. And it shouldn't take but at most a minute to figure out.
Cool. Does everyone want to try the toe touch? No, we're fine. All right, y'all. So again, just to echo Devin, it should be just something we can come back to, right? And that's what's the most important. Something quick, something easy. For me, it's a squat. If I get into a squat and I'm like, me getting out of bed every morning, like, oh God, like the audible groans. That's usually when I know today might be a little bit of a struggle. A little bit of mobility, waking up. If I go back in that squat, I'm feeling a little better. I'm like, okay, I might be okay today. Does that make sense? So something, again, find your tell, whatever that is for you. If you don't want to hang from a bar for 10 minutes, frankly, I don't blame you. Maybe a little bit of a different stimulus might work for you. Cool? So, with that, Devin's going to kind of take over. When we talk about lifting, it is a stress in some sense, so we're going to talk kind of about the difference between productive discomfort and maybe not so productive pain.
Yeah. This is where it gets a bit tricky to describe because we all experience this very differently. Productive discomfort is the point that you want to get to where you're going to get a positive adaptation. If it is painful, that's not going to lead to a positive adaptation. So that's where you'll work with a coach to find a modification or a way to scale something back. Maybe you change the tempo or the range of motion. Instead of deadlifting with a straight bar, maybe you're deadlifting with a trap bar or a kettlebell. The idea is to find something that is comfortable for you. So in a few minutes, we'll have everybody, if you're up for it, goblet squat, and we're gonna get a good gauge on what that productive discomfort feels like. You'll want it to be challenging, but not so limiting that you can't replicate what you just did. So again, this is a very personalized thing, and it's something that takes time to get a good gauge over, and you can, again, refer back to the app to see how things are progressing. Ideally, you're staying in a particular range of productive discomfort, and as you make progress, the weights that you lift, what you're able to do with that level of productive discomfort goes up on a weekly basis, monthly basis, depending on how much you're pushing things. So one thing we'll go over are how to gauge the difficulty level. We're going to use something called reps in reserve. So how many reps can you perform before your technique is just, it's not so good anymore, or you can't keep going. That's a very diplomatic way of putting it. So has anybody heard of like RPE, rate of perceived exertion? It gets really complex. Like I hire a coach and he writes my programming and he'll say, you got to get an 8.5 on this. I don't know what that means. I've done this a long time. It's wasted on me. But I've got enough practice with particular movements where I know I could have done maybe 2 more on that, or maybe I could have done 1 more. That's just a bit easier to calculate. So with our reps in reserve, if you've got 3+ on your reps in reserve, you're more than 3 reps away from getting to a failure point. So most likely, if you're trying to get stronger, that's not a weight that is going to be super helpful for you. That might be something that's more appropriate for your conditioning workout, something that is not going to be mechanically taxing, something that you can continue to perform as you are getting winded, you're out of breath, you're tired, and you get in that tunnel vision, if you know what I'm talking about. So above that, you would have 3 reps in reserve. You've got essentially 3 reps away from failure. You might measure the difficulty as a scale of 6 or 7 out of 10. And that would be more than likely a good gauge for something where the reps are like 10 or 12 or more, where the idea is you're doing this for about 30, 45 seconds. You're not trying to really push things, but it should be somewhat challenging. It's at the end of your workout. You've already done a whole bunch of things before that, and you'll want to leave a fair amount of reps on the table. To up the difficulty from there, you'll have 2 reps in reserve. That would be maybe a 7 or 8 out of 10 on the difficulty scale. And that'll be used when the volume is for 6 or more. More often than not, that's going to be in the second block, that B or that C block. And for most of what we do in our A blocks, you'll want to have 1 or 2 reps in reserve. So the difficulty might be an 8 or 9 out of 10. And that's when the volume is especially low, 2 to 5 or less. And you're just looking to really push things. So we don't want to take you to failure. You want to finish each set knowing that you could have done another one. If you were to try to replicate that amount of volume for another set, that might have been a bit unapproachable or unrealistic. So leave some left in the tank pretty much always. The idea is not to go to failure, but to get a good gauge of how to approach that. So if you have 0 reps in reserve, every once in a while we might push something like that. In December, we were really pushing our deadlifting programming. So if you spent 4 weeks really ramping up, if you're finding a max on something, that's when it's going to be a maximum effort, and it's going to be a weight that you know you're not necessarily going to be able to do again. So if you decide to compete in a strength sport, that's what you do on the platform, not necessarily in training. And that gets used sparingly. And ideally, if you're going to put yourself in that position where you're going to test things like that, you've got a 5 out of 5 on pretty much everything on the Train Heroic questions. Your cup is full, and you're just feeling really good. Let's go to the next one. So let's see if we can get a good gauge of what your reps in reserve feels like. What we're going to have you do is, we'll warm it up a little bit first. I should say that. But we're going to have you grab a kettlebell or dumbbell, something that would be challenging for a set of 10 on goblet squats, and we're just going to see how many we can get. And I want you to stop when you get to the point where there's maybe 1 or 2 left. That point where you're moving, and then all of a sudden it starts to slow down. You can't hold a conversation anymore. All you can focus on is just staying connected to that particular movement. So,
Devin will do it with you.
all right, I'll do it with you. I'm convinced. So we're just going to go over what that productive discomfort feels like, and we can use that as a gauge for choosing your weights and your reps moving forward. So let's grab a kettlebell, dumbbell. If you're feeling adventurous, if you want to try this out. If you don't, not a problem.
So how do you pick the weight?
So yeah, so if I were to say for a challenging set of 10, does a number come to mind? That's okay. So I'm happy to help you choose. I take a lot of pride in being able to help people out. Like if you've taken my class, I'm sure at some point a weight has just magically appeared by your feet, and then you see me wave at you and go, I think you can do that. So if you go too light, it's not a super big deal. You'll just end up doing quite a few more repetitions, and it's not a problem. So a good goblet squat weight could be maybe half of what you might back squat for a challenging set of 8 or 10. Yeah, you're gonna need a fair amount. You're very strong. So let's choose weights, and I'll help you out. I've had the privilege of coaching pretty much everybody here, so I always have this in the back of my mind. I don't know how I retain it. What's up?
Are we bringing them over here?
We can do it wherever. Yeah,
Yeah, we'll bring them. Heavyweight.
I'm here to help.
I'm gonna do this.
Perfect. Yeah, I was gonna give you 35. 30 is perfect. Yeah.
I can do 35. The trainer said my 1 rep max was 40. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, that's a low ball in it. Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do heavy enough weight is what I'm learning.
Okay. Hey, we're here to help. We're here to help.
It's fine.
Are we doing it in sync?
How about you count us?
Sure.
Yeah. So let's warm it up with, let's get 10 body weight squats and then 5 squat jumps. So the difference between a squat and a squat jump, you're just gonna leave the ground for the squat jump. That's it. It doesn't have to be as high as you possibly can. Just make sure you're somewhat airborne or there's just barely any weight on your feet. So arms out for counterweights. Drop your hips so that they are approaching your heels. And 10 repetitions.
Cassie's got the best footwear for this right now. Solid.
So when we get to our goblet squats, Zac is gonna count us. So we're gonna move on his command. He'll tell us up, he'll tell us down. Be nice.
I'll do my best. Yeah, just 5. Oh, we're jumping. Yep, just 5 of those squat jumps. How those legs feeling? All right, y'all, how we feeling? So good? Yeah. Yeah, quads are feeling good. So if any of you are curious, Linda's glass might be a little empty right now because she's literally coming off the back of a workout. So in terms of her readiness, it might be a little bit on the lower side, but she's also a beast, so like she can probably pump out like 30 here. So we'll see how it goes. But when y'all are ready, go ahead and clean that kettlebell up into a goblet rack. Again, you can go bell up or just hang on to the handles. From here, go ahead and find your squat stance, take your breath. We'll go down and up. That gives you 1, down, up, down, up, 3, down, up, 4, down, up, 5, down, up, 6, down, up, 7, down, up, 8, down, up, 9, down, up, 10, keep going guys, you got it, down, up, 11, down, up, 12, down, up, 13, down, up, 14, down, up, 15, down, up, 16, down, up, 17, down, up, 18, down, up, 19, down, up, 20, down, up, 21, down, up, 22, down, up, 23, down, up, 24, down, up, 25, down, up, 26, down, up, 27, down, up, 28, down, up, 29, down, up, 30, down, up, 31, down, up,
Winner.
2, down, up, 30.
Yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Up, 34, down,
We'll cap it at 35.
35, go ahead and relax, that's plenty.
Well done.
Great job, y'all, well done. Awesome. So for those of you who did 35, here might be kind of the sign that if you were to squat for 10 reps at this weight, maybe not the most productive.
Also, how did the last 3 reps feel? So this is ideally going to give you a gauge of what it feels like to have those reps in reserve. You knew the end was coming, but this was going to be an all-out set. We're not going to do it again. If we did, you'd probably be 5 or 10 reps less. So that's a good gauge for, this is hard to do right after I just squatted. So thanks for bearing with me. But essentially, you were getting closer and closer to the edge, and you knew that it was going to be a somewhat unsustainable effort. So that's why we want to use reps in reserve to really gauge that difficulty level if you've chosen the right weight. So if you didn't get that feeling on anything that you've done in a workout, the weight might be a little light.
Makes sense? So just to kind of piggyback on that, if you take like away one thing from today, reps in reserve could be your bread and butter of like, how heavy should I go? You see, okay, we've got sets of 12 today. Find that little table that Devin's set for you in that PowerPoint, check the reps in reserve, right? That's what you're shooting for. If, again, we're a little bit newer to the gym, sometimes, y'all, it's totally fine to give a test set like this. Ideally, it's at the end of what you're doing. It's not your first set, hopefully. But, you know, in terms of programming, like Devin will program this for me on the reg. He'll be like, give it a test, see what you got left in the tank, right? And so that can be an awesome gauge for y'all to get to know yourselves and know kind of like, oh, I thought, you know, 100 pounds on my back squat was a great weight for 5, and then I did as many reps as I could, and I got 15, right? So it's a great way to kind of see where you're at, and it's a great way to gauge how heavy you should be lifting.
Yeah. And if you want to implement that in the training, on the last set of every exercise, if you want to do a couple more repetitions, see how close you can get to that particular number of reps in reserve, that's a good way to test it. Because for all of us to be doing the exact same rep scheme, somebody might be plus or minus 1 or 2, and it's important to find a little bit more of a physical limitation if you've got that in the tank that day. Sound good? Cool.
Cool, we can take kettlebells back now. Promise only one more trick up our sleeves.
35.
It's gonna be a conditioning workout.
So if you're wondering how you want to choose your weights, this is a cheat sheet of essentially how I've got it programmed. So for the first week, a lot of what you do is going to be new. You're going to find a challenging weight for those particular movements, and you might take a couple sets to do that. So the first work set is X amount. Next work set, maybe you add 5 or 10 pounds. Work set after that, you add a little bit more, and that feels challenging. The goal for week 2, if your cup is full, would be to perform one of the challenging sets or the most challenging set from the previous week for multiple rounds. For week 3, if you're feeling good, you can go a little bit heavier than you did on week 2. For week 4, you've got 2 choices. Same weight as last week. Maybe you move a little bit more efficiently. Things are easier. It's a smoother set. Or if you're feeling ambitious, you can go slightly heavier. Pretty much everything is going to be structured so that you can follow along this way. So it takes out some of the guesswork for you. Compare what you did to the week before. Let's go to the next one. So before we get into the Q&A, one important thing is, I know for me, I know for Zac, we are very, very interested in how much we can push weights in the gym, and that's really fun for us. If you have other activities outside of here, what you do in the gym is going to be secondary to that. So maybe you're pushing things on a much larger time scale. You're not trying to go heavier each week. Maybe you just have a gradual amount of progress every 2 weeks, every 3, every 4. If you are depleting yourself in here, and that's not leaving you recovered enough for the activities that you enjoy outside of here, going a little bit lighter can help you enjoy those activities a little bit more.
Yeah, and so just kind of piggyback on that, it all comes down to what are your individual goals, right? And if you don't know, now might be a great time to ask yourself, what are my individual goals? For some of you, it might just be, I want to train for an ultra and make sure I can stay healthy over 100 miles of running. I don't know why you'd ever choose to do that, but hey, more power to you, right? For Devin and I, it's how much weight can we lift just because we enjoy it. Others, it might be, you know what, summer's right around the corner, it's time to get my beach bod going, totally fine as well, right? But once you set your goals, it's gonna be a lot easier to start deciding, okay, how much do I need to push weight this week? Versus, am I just using this as something to supplement my lifestyle outside? All of which is totally awesome and totally okay. Cool?
So with all that said, as a part of your membership, you get a quarterly session with the coach. So if you want to have a more specific conversation around how you want to structure our programming around your goals, let's talk, let's help you out. So now we'll open it up for questions.
I was so good at that.
Once every 3 months, right?
What's that?
Once every 3 months.
Yes. Yeah. Any questions? Anything we can elaborate on? We had a hard time trying to keep this under 3 hours. So we could talk about this for a very, very long time.
How do you guys organize your? I noticed that you like pick a different thing to focus on every month. How do you like rotate through those things? Like, how do you choose what you want to focus on?
Yeah, so it's typically, we'll categorize it in push, pull, maybe a knee dominant movement, a hip dominant movement. You'll see a variety of those in each month's programming. So maybe you have your split squat is a bit more emphasized one cycle, and maybe it's the deadlift in another cycle. So it's structured in a way where it's not overly redundant. The idea is to build a high level of general strength and to add in some things that are relatively new. So you'll see some staples like, people love to deadlift here. I get so many comments on that. That's always gonna be in the programming. So I always try to get a gauge of what it is that people like. I'm always taking notes of what strengths and weaknesses are, and if there's things that people are they're clamoring for, they want to learn a little bit more about something, we'll go over that. If there's something that I see is more of a sticking point for people, then we'll choose an exercise variation that helps you out with that. So if somebody struggles at the bottom of a chin-up, we're going to do something for your lats. If you struggle at the top of a chin-up, we'll do something for bicep strength so that becomes a weakness instead of a sticking point. Yes?
So a lot of gyms and a lot of workouts do things like leg day, back day,
Yeah.
arm day. We don't do that at all. It's all full body.
Yes.
Why is that?
So, I could talk about this for a while. So basically you have, with training, there's a maximum recoverable volume and then a minimum effective dose. So as you get more and more well trained or your intensity goes way, way up, if you're getting really, really close to the maximum recoverable volume, you're gonna need a lot of time in between workouts. So if somebody is bodybuilding, they're gonna take things to a pretty high level of depletion, and that's when you're sore for like 2 or 3 days. So your leg day is gonna be twice a week. So some muscles recover a little bit faster, some a little bit more slowly. I don't know if you felt that like the rotator cuff or the low back tends to recover a little bit more slowly than other things because you're constantly moving your arms and holding yourself upright. So those are factors there. But for a lot of what we do here, it takes a while to get towards an absolute like physical limitation of what you can push. So I know for me, I'm working on a 600 deadlift. So I can only hit certain weights with a certain frequency. So if I'm pulling over 500, I can probably do that once a week. Otherwise, I need more time to recover. So if somebody has a more general level of strength, if you're working towards a chin-up, a body weight squat, you can recover a lot faster. So we perform these full body workouts because we're not taxing anything overly so. There's not a super elite level of strength where like certain elite deadlifters, they're gonna deadlift heavy every 2 weeks. It just takes that much time to recover. So we're not hitting those highs and we're not taking you to that level of depletion. So you have the ability to do a full body workout every single time, but what you do in those full body workouts is varied enough so that you can still recover. That's a good question.
That was a great answer.
Thank you. Yeah, I could talk about this for a very long time. What else? Yes?
Do you guys expect recovery days? Like, and if there are recovery
Yeah.
days, like which days should they be on? Because like Tuesday, Thursday are similar.
Yeah.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday are similar.
Yeah, at least get one recovery day a week. So For a lot of people, that ends up being a weekend. So maybe you take Saturday off, maybe you take Sunday off. We structure this in such a way where you can perform the programming 5 or 6 days a week and not have it be negatively affecting. But we do encourage one day off, and everybody's schedule is a little bit different, but at least one day to just not train like this is very, very necessary. Anything else? I could keep going. I love this.
I want to add one sentiment about
Yeah.
under recovery.
Yes.
There's like overtraining, and I say it's under recovery. So
Yeah.
like, you could be doing everything in here perfectly, but if you're not sleeping or managing your stress,
Yeah.
boom. So
Yeah, exactly.
the readiness questions on training pro,
Yeah, they're really, really helpful. And if you're used to 3 days a week and you decide to bump up to 4 days a week, take time getting your weights and your intensity up there, because it'll take a little while to acclimate to that, depending on how you recover, what your stress levels are like. Bye. It might take 2 weeks. It might take 4 weeks. Like, I remember I was training for a super total meet. It took 12 weeks to do that. And that's weightlifting on a Saturday and then powerlifting on a Sunday. And I was training 5 days a week. And my knees were kind of achy. My shoulders were kind of achy. It took me 8 weeks to adjust to that much volume before I could start to really push things. So you've got to be able to listen to your body to get a feel for how you're performing, how you're recovering, because it really does come down to, are you under recovered? It's just a matter of time before you're able to get to that level of effort again. And if you are upping your frequency, take the time to acclimate to that. It doesn't mean that your weights have to go up every single workout. Just get used to a little bit more volume before you start upping the intensity.
I think on that note too, not to take it back to like, it's all subjective, but know yourself. If you're like up off the couch like me, you wander into a gym for the first time, maybe 6 days a week might be tough, right? And so that's where like also like know thyself a little bit. Start with 2, maybe squeeze a rest day in the middle, start with another 2, right? If you've been doing this for 5 years and you're like, nope, I've basically lived in the weight room like Devin for the past 5 years. No, seriously, his bed's over there. No, I'm kidding. You know, obviously his training capacity, the ability for his body to kind of take that volume, he's worked on it, he's built it. Does that make sense? And so when, you know, if you have a day where you wake up and you're like, oh man, like, yeah, my knees are a little sore, maybe that could be a sign that you need that rest day. Or if you're like, nope, like I'm starting to add a day a week, I've gone from 4, now I want to add that 5th, give it a little bit of time to kind of kick in, right? You might, after that first week, just be like, poof, I am toast. When I started my Olympic lifting training, it was like that, like for 4 weeks. After that, you start to finally be like, okay, it's coming along, my body's starting to catch up, right? And that's all, again, comes back to when we take a step back and look at over a 3-month, 6-month period. First month might be pretty tough, but when you step back, then your body will start to adapt and things will start to become a little bit easier for you.
So how do you figure out, like, as we add new exercises, you know, I think of like today when we were doing the Cuban, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So it's like, well, how do I know what weight, you know, if I look at Train Heroic, and it's probably a year
Yeah.
before I last logged that.
Yeah.
So how do I know, you know, besides picking it up and like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Pick the wrong weight. You know, is there kind of guidance, you know, because you do these exercises, you know, or what?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is like, if you're just not sure, err on the side of caution, start low. For Cuban press, I'll recommend somebody move like a quarter, maybe a third of what they would overhead press, because what you're taxing is the rotator cuff. So the idea is you might choose weights based off of a particular metric. So on the 3-point row, for example, if somebody's able to do a chin up, ideally they're able to 3-point row 40% of their body weight, because that's really not far off from 2 arms pulling 80% of your body weight. So there's certain metrics in terms of a percentage of a particular lift, and if you find that you're far below that or far above that, that's either something that you really need to work on or something that may not be the best use of your time. You're just continually working on something that you're already really good at. So there's particular metrics. You can look at ratios of strength. Like, I don't know if anybody squats and deadlifts the exact same weight. That's typically uncommon. So with like an RDL, that's typically 80% of what you might deadlift. And if you're far below that, that could be something that you want to push to bring everything up. So there's certain metrics that we consider, things that we'll share with our coaches in terms of helping people choose their weights. But if you're just not sure, start light. And if you've got 3 or more reps in reserve, yeah, bump it up. Any other questions?
How do you know all of the like percentages of like this is about half of what you would deadlift or something like that?
Yeah.
Somewhere online?
I've read that and stuff. I mean, a lot of it is, yeah.
Yeah, you read a lot.
Yeah. I mean, there are some things like in the sport of weightlifting, like typically if somebody can front squat a weight 3 times, then they can clean it. And those are particular metrics that you can utilize. But a lot of it is just the time that we've spent with people. We've just noticed particular trends. But it's also, going back to the chin up and row example, the top of a chin up is very similar to the top of a row. So if you already have that particular strength, you've just reconfigured yourself in a different position relative to gravity. So you're already doing that in one way. And this is just attacking a weak point in a slightly different angle. So does that answer the question? Yeah, it's just, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask you all a question? Would you find it helpful if coaches, during workouts, if you see a new movement, had some sort of metric for you, for example, with the Cuban press, with the bent over row, would you find that helpful to give you that benchmark, or are you just like, nah, just let me figure it out?
Deal. Yeah.
Yeah, like if you deadlift 300 pounds. Okay, perfect.
Are there certain things we should know? Like, are there some basic deadlift, RDL, whatever, that we should know what our max is? Like going into a class, basically?
If you want.
Yeah, I mean, I would say not necessarily. That's what we're here for. Yeah.
You remember that, it definitely streamlines the process, but there's just a lot to remember too. You know? Do you want to remember all that? You know?
Not really.
That's okay. That's okay.
If only we had an app for that, y'all. I mean.
So it's either tracked in the app or you can refer back to the coach, and we've got notes, and we can continue to take those notes.
We take notes on you. You don't know it, but we do. Yeah, I think it's, yeah. Yeah, I think, to kind of echo what Devin said, it's about how efficient do you want to be in terms of how fast you want things to go, right? It's totally fine to come in and not necessarily remember, like, all right, the last time I deadlifted for me was 5-6 months ago. Like, I knew what my 1RM, my 1 rep max was then. I couldn't tell you what it is now. So it gives me a launching point, but there's still some wiggle room that I'd kind of have to figure out. If you're cool coming in and being like, all right, like I think I was around here, see how it goes. Use that reps in reserve scheme to kind of give you a sense of how the weight needs to be adjusted. Maybe you're a little overzealous and it needs to come down. Maybe you're like, nope, I'm crushing it needs to go up. But it can help streamline so that, like, all right, we've got 5 reps today on whatever the movement is. You have a look, other than reps in reserve. Again, I don't want to sidetrack us, but there is like estimated percentages of that 1RM, right? That for me is what I tend to use as opposed to the reps in reserve. Find what works, right? And if you want to go online, you can Google it. It's going to be a little bit different for everyone. My endurance background is soccer, so my legs go longer. As soon as I try and do that with my bench press, it all goes out the window, right? Devin's a little different. Like, he's freakishly strong. He can do that stuff like crazy good, so it's just going to have a little bit of that dependency on what your background is, how you're feeling, all that stuff, but can definitely be helpful.
Cool. Did we answer everything? All right.
Cool. Well, thanks for coming, y'all.